The state of Qatar has amended its statement on the Afghanistan-Pakistan ceasefire agreement after uproar in Afghanistan over the use of the word border. Welcome to another episode of Let Ali Show You. The agreement that was signed in Doha, Qatar over the past 24 hours between the governments of Afghanistan and Pakistan, which was issued by the state of Qatar, has become a bone of contention of sorts, leading to Doha issuing a revision. Initially, it had mentioned the word border, as I mentioned, but now it has removed that word. Why is it so? Why is the word border such a contentious issue for Pakistan and Afghanistan, even under the Taliban regime? To get a better understanding of this, I'm joined by Obaidullah Baheer. Once again, thank you so much, Obaidullah, for joining us. He, of course, is a lecturer with American University in Kabul. He's also an analyst. So tell us, why is this word so contentious? And are you surprised by the revision issued by the Qatari Foreign Ministry?
Ali, always happy to be with you here. We created these things, paper money, borders, national identities, go back 500 years, and who are we? It's a tricky line to draw. I mean, there's a whole argument about origins and beginnings, and where do you trace the origin of a river? That's people. So that being said, certain symbolic things matter quite a lot. And I mean, it's shocking to me, honestly, like when I see the reaction from both sides, I did put out a tweet trying to explain what exactly the Afghan stance on the Durand Line is. I mean, it's important to look at the history of the Durand Line. Ali, it starts off all the way back in the time of Dost Mahmud Khan during the first Anglo-Afghan War, where the territory of KPK is taken over by initially the Sikhs right after Ahmad Shah Durrani, or Ahmad Shah Baba, as we call him, passes away. This territory slips from the hands of his son. And then since then has been an attempt to reclaim it until after the first Anglo-Afghan War. There's an understanding between the British and the Afghan Empire of the time that the British will administer this area, right? So there's an agreement on a form of a border in this area. And then eventually you have Abdurrahman Khan after the Second Anglo-Afghan War, or also known as the Iron Emir. He eventually is forced, as a result of his war with the British, and then eventually coming back to power, to accept the demarcation as the official border of Afghanistan. This is done when he eventually, after some claim that 7 years of coming back into power, he sits down with the British envoy and there's a document signed. And then that persists until the time of Amanullah Khan in the beginning of the 20th century, when he finally refuses to subjugate Afghanistan to the British, where Afghanistan would act as a crypto colony. So there's a difference between a colony and a crypto colony. Afghanistan has never been formally colonized. A crypto colony is when you say, you'll only trade with me specifically when it comes to arms, and I will dictate your foreign policy. So our kings were ruling within an echo chamber that was Afghanistan, and Amanullah Khan says, I will not take that anymore. He writes a letter to the King of England as an equal monarch, and the British are shocked as to the scandalous nature of that move. And then he starts reaching out to other foreign offices. The Third Anglo-Afghan War happens, and that is skirmishes across the Durand Line that ends with a treaty signed in Rawalpindi, where something known as the Durand Line is formally recognized as a separator between British-administered India and Afghanistan. Okay, so this is the history. Now, there's a lot of ways of looking at it. Okay, there's an agreement, colonial line between the British and the Afghans at the time. This was signed with the monarchs. It wasn't a democratic regime. And all of those complications, and the fact that if you're going to talk about nation states, right, so it's nations, and the fact that this is one nation, these are one people, historically speaking. If you cancel out some historians like Caro, who writes about the Pathan, which is a whole new identity that is manufactured for the people that live in KPK, somehow historically separating them from their Afghan origins. At the end of it all is the fact that when the partition happens in India, this land is then given as part of Pakistan. Now, you have to understand that there was a UN referendum at that time. So a month before the partition happens, there's a referendum in KPK where only 7% of the population registered to vote, and then half of them show up, right? Because at the root of the problem is the fact that Bacha Khan and other leaders within the area say, well, you can't just give us two options between Pakistan and India. You know, like there has to be an option of a separate Pashtun nation. There has to be an option of Afghanistan. Only then does this referendum make sense. But just on the sheer numbers of it, obviously there's a clear majority for Pakistan. And it's decided to merge within what then becomes Pakistan. But then where are we now? How does the Durand Line operate? We're not the only two countries, Ali, in the world that have a disputed border or demarcation, right? Line of actual control, India and China. Line of control, Pakistan and India on Kashmir. Cyprus's border, North Korea and South Korea, Morocco's border. And the list goes on, where either one side or both sides refuse to recognize the border as an international border. But what does that mean? All of these examples approach the demarcation as a de facto demarcation. Like, when have you seen an Afghan official say, I will not ask for a visa anymore, and I will just march into KPK? Right? That doesn't happen, because we do have a gate, we do have a visa regime, and so we're dealing with it as a de facto demarcation. We have never said we were going to march into KPK and reclaim that land. That never has been an agenda, right? Then why make it such a big issue when it is like the Kantian antinomies? You believe, for example, in one God, I believe in another. You don't have anything to prove for it. I have nothing to prove for it. We agree to disagree, right? We talk about the more practical issues instead of being bogged down in this. So why make it such a big thing? Because we can both call it different things and then approach it as a reality and deal with it as things come.
It makes sense from your perspective, but the Pakistani perspective would be that in practical terms, what you are saying has meant over 1,300 people, mostly soldiers, being killed in the past 1 year in along these borders or on the Pakistan side of the border. And leading up to, and this is a conversation that we've had as well before, but leading up to the strikes or the alleged strikes in Kabul, definite strikes in Paktika, where at least three Afghan cricketers have been killed. It means practically the Pakistanis see this idea that you hold in action with what they allege the Pakistani Taliban, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is doing with the support, and this is the Pakistani position, of the Afghan Taliban. Something which the Afghan Taliban, it seems that after this, if you want to call it skirmish, limited war, whatever, their currency or their nationalist credentials have increased as a result of what happened along the Durand Line or the border, whatever you want to call it.
So, for starters, GTP has never claimed a nationalistic agenda, right? One of the problems that we as Afghans have with the Taliban is, why do you have such an animosity with our nationalism, right? The fact that Afghanistan for the longest of times had a split between, and I've written about this, a split between the more reformist, nationalist thinking and the religious zealot groups that have emerged. And we've been at a clash with each other, which we're trying to reconcile in these years that have passed. So TTP never claimed a nationalistic or a greater Afghanistan agenda. Neither does the Afghan soldier who shoots back at the border disputes is claiming that I'm marching in to reclaim my land. The thing is that this is a back burner issue. Like, making it a forefront issue creates more problems than it solves, right? But you have to understand that rhetoric matters. We can both call it the different things, and ultimately the reality is going to be one, right? The fact that there is a visa regime, that there is a gate that we have to pass through to get across to each other is the reality, is the de facto reality that is on the ground. I mean, it's not like the Qataris revised the statement and called it a Durand Line. Right? They just chose to not be embroiled in the politics of the border and the line, right? So this was a more impartial stance, because what had happened was that the very same Pakistani online pundits went online and said, oh, here, we made the Taliban recognize the Durand Line, right? So you created pressure that led the Taliban to react and ask Qatar to, because, okay, here's the thing. You do realize that the agreement in Doha is not published, right? So the actual ceasefire agreement is, they made them sign NDAs, so no one is publishing the actual content of it. So the only thing that we had were statements that came out. And when Qatar puts out a statement in which it mentions the border, everyone thinks that the conversation was about the border, whereas the conversation clearly was not, right? It was, Durand Line was not one of the talking points. The talking points were more immediate concerns like the TTP, like the violation of Afghan sovereignty. So all of that on one side. And then here's what bothers me, right, is we discussed this whole model as to how problematic it is when you're following the American war on terror model, saying, I get bombed by an insurgent group, I'm going to bomb civilians in return, because there's no precision striking, right? We already saw during Obama's campaign of drone strikes how many people were killed. We've seen Pakistani operations within the tribal areas and how much collateral it causes. Thing is, there is nothing such as precision striking, right? This is just you saying, I'm going to show military bravado. And look, Ali, I just want to say one thing. We can keep spinning this forever. You know, you can go along and spin this as the biggest victory. Like I saw friends of mine posting saying, oh, the Afghan myth of being graveyard of empires has been shattered, right? Like, if a few drone strikes were all it took, then the Americans probably shattered it 20 years ago, you know? So the point is, like, it helps no one. Like, I can keep spinning it 100 different ways to make it look like a victory for Afghanistan. And another side can make it look like a victory for Pakistan. At the end of the day, people died, civilians died, right? Be it, and soldiers died. Like, soldiers from both sides died. Why did they have to give up their life? You know, why did we have to get to a point where, why have we spent the last 24 years in declining relations?
Yeah. In Qatar, we saw Mullah Yaqub, who has grown a lot in stature. We saw Khwaja Asif, the Pakistani defense minister, basically come together. And as you said, that we don't have the details of what is in these agreements, and these talks are expected to continue in Istanbul next weekend. So can the Afghan Taliban seriously control the activities of the Pakistani Taliban? And who guarantees that? Can the Qataris or the Turks guarantee that TTP will not attack Pakistani soldiers, civilians, infrastructure, and then who will be accountable for that?
Pakistan saying we want a de-escalation with TTP, and the point was to set up grounds for whatever was to follow. And rationally, it would be a political settlement that they would try to move towards. And then just changing that. So here's how it's irrational, right? You upped the cost of the Taliban compliance because you just bombed civilians. So their face value is going to be severely hit if they make serious compromises. Okay, one. On the second end, you, despite increasing the cost, you also increase your demand, which is you went from de-escalation to saying no more TTP attacks. If the Taliban have so much control over the TTP that they can make them stop attacking Pakistani military targets and make them let go of their political goals or military goals or whatever have you, then why are you even talking to the TTP? Then the Taliban are the ones you're at war with, and this is a rhetoric problem as well, and that's creating a whole national narrative saying we are attacked by Afghanistan. No, you're not attacked by Afghanistan. You're attacked by an internal element that you're claiming operates from Afghanistan. So there has to be a very detailed attention given to this nuance, right? Because what happens is the common citizen is like, oh, Afghanistan is attacking us, right? Or Afghanistan is now sitting with India. Like it's such a unforgivable sin to shake hands with India. And somehow India perceives that as being impartial or keeping a balance. And Pakistan is like, oh my God, they took India's side. So like you cannot even tolerate balance from Afghanistan when it comes to India. And that's where the whole problem of crypto colonialism comes back in, where you don't see this country as an independent country that could have its own foreign policy. So, and then the selective application of the Ummah, they tell you, why didn't you do this? Because, hey, Ummah, where's the Ummah when you're sitting down with Trump? Where's the Ummah when you're doing 100 other different things that are morally questionable? Or when you're kicking out millions of Afghan refugees and creating a whole racist narrative? I don't know if you saw the dehumanization of Afghans in Pakistan piece that came out on social media, but that's a real challenge. You have poisoned the well. I have such dear friends in Pakistan, people that I consider family. And now we're at a point where supposedly we're at war. Like, why get to that point? Why wash over all those good memories that we've had? So if the Afghan Taliban have influence, have realistic expectations, know that there's going to be a cool down period because you just bombed major cities within Afghanistan, which was an unprecedented act, which according to some is a war crime based on international humanitarian law. So let's give it a cool down period. Let's sit down, then discuss matters. Ali, between us, the history of most of this TTP. Wasn't Hafiz Gul Bahadur a good Taliban? Wasn't he a state element for a very long time? And then you suddenly turn around like these people descended from the sky, like they're aliens to this whole thing, and that there's a ploy, like we sit down in Kabul every night and we're like, let's make TTP plans, how can we conquer Pakistan? That's not the reality of it. The reality is even Hillary Clinton kept telling you, stop keeping snakes in your backyard. Because you were playing with fire. You were creating these groups, you were sponsoring them. And now suddenly when we're saying this back, it just doesn't make sense anymore. You're like, no, you have to police it. And you don't have writ of government. Where was your writ for 20 years? Or where was this thinking about something will burn me back when for 40, 50 years you had this whole approach of controlled chaos in Afghanistan, where you constantly, like Dawood Khan, where like I was, like my uncles weren't even born. One of my uncle is named Dawood because he was born on the day he came to power. From then, you were sponsoring anti-state elements. Like why? Like from Bhutto's time, you're going ahead and doing this, and then there are going to be consequences. Obviously, there are going to be anti-Pakistan sentiments, which we don't want. We don't want anti-anybody sentiments across our borders. Like we want to sit down, we want to figure out how to, like, when can we move beyond geostrategy to actually talking about geoeconomy? Let's talk about how can we help each other? How can we grow with each other?
I remember when the Taliban took Kabul, soon after, in the months that followed, actually before that, Pakistan had started fencing their borders and trying to create some sort of separation. You had these videos that started coming out of the Taliban with possibly Pakistani Taliban elements with them tearing down border fences. I don't know if you remember those scenes. Moving forward, and I think this is an important question. We saw that these talks or these mediations took place in Qatar. China was largely absent, but China did try to engage back in August and September in Kabul with a meeting of the trilateral, uh, combine that these countries have, China, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and try to mediate some sort of like rapprochement with Isaac Dar and Muttaqi in attendance. But then now China has said, issued a statement, you guys need to figure this out, cool yourselves down. But it was absent from this gathering. Instead, the Turks were there alongside the Qataris. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the Chinese had placed calls. They had intervened on both sides, asking them to sit down. So, and I think Uncle Sam also placed a call to get everyone to the negotiating table. But I don't think the call was placed on the Afghan side, especially from the US. But the Arabs ended up becoming the hosts. Turkey chose to be involved, and those are good actors. These are actors that both states actually have some faith in, and for a mediator to have some level of faith and some influence is important. So good on them for intervening. The point that I wanted to make was there has to be a serious question on ROIs, returns on investment. Why is there no one asking, how come you spent 20 years or even longer being allied to a group that you couldn't keep as a friend for more than a few months when they came to power, right? You assumed that the Taliban taking over Kabul was your victory. We defeated America with the help of America, right? And then so this whole overestimation is the problem, right? Okay, Taliban came to power. Okay, you had helped them. But then you go ahead, putting out statements like saying, oh, chains of slavery broken. Then you have your ambassador here who's sitting and chairing ministry meetings like he's a viceroy in Kabul. Like the image that puts out. Then General Faiz Hamid having his tea and making it sound like they defeated India in Afghanistan. All of those were overestimations, on Pakistan's side of how much the Taliban did not owe Pakistan anything. They militarily won. Had they come to power through a political settlement, they would have owed Pakistan. But they said, we fought for it 11 days and we took over the whole country, right? So there had to be a readjustment. We in Pashto say some people get on a scale and never remember to get on it for the next 10 years. So they assume their weight is still the one that was. And here a conversation needs to happen. Why do we constantly invest in people and we can't keep them? Because the expectations are wrong. Yes, did the Afghan Taliban not sit down the TTP for you? Did they not mediate? Did they not help in moving people, Waziristani refugees within Afghanistan? Did they not issue a statement saying that Afghans should not participate in the fight in like these were very, very big things coming from but they were taken as if they were nothing. Why? Because there's always an overestimation and asking for too much. And my fear is that this whole ceasefire is going to be very fickle if we keep approaching it with the same mentality of expecting Afghanistan to become a proxy, become a fifth province, not have its independent foreign policy or over deliver on the TTP front. Loss of life is regrettable. No one in Afghanistan is sitting here celebrating TTP attacks, and then you don't even want to talk to the non-violent elements. PTM is banned, BYC is banned, and the whole TLP dramas on another side, your PTI problems. So it's so many fronts internally and externally. There has to be a thinking. And it's not like I'm saying Afghanistan is perfect. We do go up to those who are in power in Afghanistan. We do give them an earload regarding problematic steps and policies and even foreign policies. But here, because I would imagine most of your viewers are going to be Pakistani and I just wanted to speak the sense, because if nothing else, war strips you of humanity. The fact that you didn't bat your eye twice when videos emerged of children and women being pulled out of the rubble in Afghanistan. the fact that your moral conscience did not give a knee-jerk reaction to statements coming out from Pakistani friends saying, let Kabul and Kandahar burn. When you did not speak out against the fact that there were people arguing that we didn't kill these children, the Taliban made us kill them, like, which is ditto Israeli statements, right? Where were the liberals, the anti-state or the critics of the state at that time? Why didn't they come out and say, well, Afghans are humans too. Why are you doing that to civilians? You know, so I mean, a deep part of me was extremely disappointed, because I remember times when Pakistan's territory or aerial sovereignty was violated, when Pakistani lives were lost. I felt for my friends. I came out for them, you know, and you cannot have a selective sense of justice, you know, like what? There's a hierarchy of death and Afghan lives matter less. And if it's done to you, it's bad. And if you do it, then it's okay. I mean, we got to this point, and someone needs to ask a question. I think, what's that share that says, "Unhe kaise koi azad kare jinko apni gulami ka ilm nahi."
अपनी गुलामी का इल्म तो है, लेकिन कर क्या सकते हैं जब इतना जुल्म खुद ही बर्दाश्त करना पड़े. And I think that is a very essential thing. You said a few things here. It's not that you aren't aware of what's happening in your neighborhood in Pakistan. You are extremely aware. And you said that Pakistan wants to control Afghan foreign policy, what it does, who it interacts with, doesn't interact with. That might be so, but then the argument can be made that Pakistan's own foreign policy isn't independent, that it has, in fact, had to outsource its diplomacy to reach arrangements and conclusions, even with its own neighbors. Now, with Doha, with Qatar and Turkey, Pakistan again has had to outsource its diplomacy. And so Pakistan, an argument can be made that Pakistan's own foreign policy isn't independent, just like its own economic affairs aren't independent and are beholden. So aren't you expecting a little too much from Pakistan, Obaidullah?
Look, I think the whole Hobbesian argument of the Leviathan, the biggest monster of all, underlying it is the social contract. The social contract is you accept a beast because they will do things for you. They will stop you from being beasts amongst each other. And I mean, I think there's a colonial legacy here that needs to be discussed. Western countries had a very natural progression. I think James Tully writes about this with state making and war making. I think in our parts of the world, one thing that happens is when the colonizer leaves, they need an institution, they need an in. And they overpowered certain institutions to be above oversight, to claim most of the budgets. And that will naturally lead to a Schmittian world, you know, where everything is friend-enemy distinction, you know. There is a universality of enmity. There is a siege mentality where, like, you know how, like, when you're paranoid and you're hearing voices and you're thinking everyone's plotting against you, I think that is a major problem. I know that the first people that suffer from these bad policies are Pakistanis, you know, because, yeah, you might be killing my civilians, but your economy is going to shits for it, you know, so you cannot afford more wars and you're constantly engaging in them. And your territorial integrity is under threat from Balochistan, from KPK. 1 year ago, the reports were that 12 districts are under TTP control. They govern 12 districts within KPK, right? When is there going to be a time where they sit down and realistically, like the Taliban did this as well, okay? The Taliban did not deal with reality. And here's where compounded rationality comes in, where you're like, so in normal negotiations, you and I have battle assessments. You look at how many tanks you have, I look at how many tanks, and we're like, okay, great, this isn't getting anywhere, let's sit down and talk. But when you have compounded rationality, so for the Taliban, since they had metaphysical backing, it didn't matter whether they had tanks or bullets, God was on their side, and that was enough, right? Which meant that they got to the negotiating table quite late, but it worked in their favor. But on the other side, with this whole compounded rationality within Pakistan, where there is no direct thinking about the cost of war, right? Because they don't feel it. The institution does not feel it. It is felt by the other person, the people that fund all of this, and they're not part of the decision making. So like my complaint isn't against Pakistanis. Like मैं तो अखलाकन चाह रहा हूं कि वो कुछ बोले. मैं ये expect नहीं कर रहा कि इस्लामाबाद में लोग निकले and they can change policies for me. It's not on them. I'm not expecting that, but I'm expecting lip service, right? At least for its normative value, whether that's going to happen anytime soon or not. But this whole military bravado and chest banging isn't helping anyone. And we tell the Taliban not to do it as well. And it has to stop happening from across Durand as well.
One final thing. There are these rumors that are floating that this happened after Trump said that there were talks that the US government was holding with the Afghan Taliban over Bagram. And if soon after he said that there will be consequences for the Taliban if they don't agree. And then the timeline takes us to the attacks that happened, aggravation. So there are these conspiracies that are being floated that this has to do with the Americans on one side, but then you have people like Zalmay Khalilzad that are saying things complete, they're laying it out as is. So there seems to be some confusion on the American position. What is that American position?
I think sometimes we apply, I teach a course on sociology as well, in which we teach dermatology and dramatology about how life is a theater. Everyone's wearing masks, and that's Goffman for you. But I think we sometimes confuse reality and theater as well, where we think that Chekhov's gun, if the gun shows up, then it has to be used at some point in the play. I mean, with Trump says a lot of stuff. How many of his things actually have happened or have been followed through. So I don't think the whole Bagram thing was a thing. I do think that there was a long period in which the Pakistani establishment tried to sell to the Americans that the Taliban weren't the best ISKP fighting partners, and you should funnel your money through us again, and a whole repeat of the past 20 years. And that didn't happen. So there is an interest of creating a security dilemma, dragging the US into it and making the US pay for it. But that doesn't seem to be flying. And in return, there is a conversation now on minerals and resources. Maybe that can go through, but I think the American involvement is overestimated in this conflict right now. So is the Indian involvement. I think Shehbaz Sharif did say that, they're getting too cozy with India. I think the timing was just coincidental. But we were getting to this point, like there were Pakistani generals who were itching to start bombing Afghanistan, and some people were holding them back. And then after the retaliation on the border, all sense went out of the window, and the naysayers as well got on board and saying, yeah, okay, let's make this our strategy, that we're going to bomb every time TTP attacks us. And it didn't get us anywhere. Look, I mean, there were no winners. The fact that it took a week for everyone to rush to ceasefires and negotiating tables shows that war is ugly, and especially when your neighbors. I mean, you can't change our regime. We can't change yours, and the small people in between, the civilians, end up getting hurt. So just avoiding that at all costs.
Yeah, but a lot of the Afghan diaspora, Obaidullah, was almost like declaring victory, for the Pakistanis as well, which was quite remarkable. Like accounts that would 3-4 years ago be like lambasting the Pakistani military and accusing them of being sponsors would be like supporting them. So it was like, what is going on? What world, what timeline is this?
I'll give you the pearls of wisdom of Asif Khaja, who said, the friend of my friend is my friend, and the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. So it's a shifting alliances world. I mean, to be fair, like we don't have the worst diaspora in the world. And it's interesting to hear that from a lot of international actors who say, trust me, we've seen other countries that have much worse diaspora, including Iran. So, I mean, it was an ugly time. The past 20 years created a lot of personalities that were funded by either or, and they were underqualified, and now they have large public audiences, and they don't help because they don't have any skin in the game. I always say that there's a qualifier for doing politics in ancient Greece. If you don't own property, you have no skin in the game, please don't speak about. So property qualification was important. And I feel like there has to be a skin in the game qualification to talk about politics. When you've barely entered the country, when you've barely risked anything for it, when you're barely going to feel the consequences, then you're not the right person to talk about the situation. If I am sitting here, I am the one driving through Kabul and hearing those bomb blasts, or if we were criticizing the Taliban, we were here in Kabul and doing it, So your voice's importance or projection should be relative to how much cost you are willing to pay or have paid. And I think that's a rationale that should apply everywhere within the region.
A lot of people that are outside have paid the cost, they would argue. I'm not saying, I can only speak for my position, but they would say that, the cost is of them having to leave for whatever reason. Or, some people don't have that kind of connection. But
no, but your skin in the game is still there, like you're still risking quite a lot doing what you're doing, Ali, right? You have family back home, so there are very real life consequences for you. But for some person who it completely lives in a bubble abroad and somehow gives themselves the right to say things that have real life consequences for other people, that's a shame, So like, I understand limitations, and I have a lot of friends who left for very legitimate reasons, and they continue to do good work from abroad. But this conversation is about those detached people who don't have a lived experience, refuse to have it despite no barriers for them, and then yet give themselves the right to make very tough decisions for poor Afghans who are going to be the ones who end up paying the price.
On that point, Obaidullah, I appreciate your insights, and we would always love to have you here and have you talk about these issues. And these issues, you're living through them. A lot of people are living through them. 250 million people in Pakistan, around 40 million people in Afghanistan. There's no separation. There's no escape from the destinies that connect us and our geography as well. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me.
What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section. Do like, subscribe, and share this content. I will see you next time. Till then, take care.